Hello, 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 hello. We are going to play a game today called Let's See How Long Matt's Voice is going to Last. I, unfortunately, have been plagued with the AIDS brought to me by my beloved wife and child. I
Brought
held
to you
out
by the
for,
Wuhan Institute of Virology.
yeah, by way of my wife and child. I held out for like a week or 10 days or something like that. And then it finally got me. And I am feeling rather dead, extremely medicated. But we wanted to make sure we got a show in here for you guys today because I don't know if we're going to be able to do one tomorrow. And Cooper had a little window here. And our good friend Kurt has released a new piece called "A Conversation About Monarchy," which is very interesting. And these live reading episodes are kind of nice for me because I don't have to use my brain really. I just kind of have to read what's in front of me. Makes for nice, easy content. So we're going to do this live reading here today. Right when we were about to get started, I was popping in a Zen, and I held this one up and I said he told Cooper the flavor is smooth. And he said that doesn't tell you anything about what the flavor is. The flavor is basically gray and red. That's what I know.
That did you ever back in the day? Did you ever smoke black and milds?
Uh-huh. Yeah, that was
That reminds.
my first bad boy. I'd
Oh,
smoke black and milds, and I didn't know you weren't supposed to inhale them. And I was like, man, smokers are intense, man.
you're not.
No, you're not supposed to inhale the black and
Oh,
milds.
maybe that's why they sucked so much.
That's why I got sick every time I smoked one, but I did it anyways.
Yeah, well, it remind like that smooth flavor reminds me of the black and mild that just had like jazz. Like whatever jazz. Like I don't know what that flavor is,
I
but
liked that one. That was one of my favorites.
oh man, we used to hypothetically, not in real life. Um,
In Minecraft.
that's right. In Minecraft, when Xavier might have even been party to this on occasion, but I know one of our mutual friends was. In any case, a now defunct party store that used to be over by the trailer park. They used to keep their black and milds up on the counter. So like the partner in crime, whether it be may it be Xavier or somebody else, would go and like buy a like an Arizona iced tea or something like that. And while the cashier was distracted checking out for that $1 Arizona, I would just stuff like 10 of those fuckers in my pocket. Those black and milds. Because this was before we were 18 and we couldn't buy them. Because once upon a time you could buy smokes when you were 18. The things they've taken from us. Um, and I remember Jazz was one that we used to hit quite a lot, and that was rough. That was rough, but we had to get the nicotine somehow.
It's funny. I actually had I was like, I haven't had one in. I mean, it was probably been at least 10 or 12 years since I'd smoked one. So I bought a. I can't remember if it was a black and mild or a Swisher Sweet, but I bought one just recently, and was out going for a walk, and I was like, I'll smoke myself a little cigarillo here, and I hit it, and I was like, oh, that's horrible. How did I used to do this to myself? I took like 3 hits from it, and I was like, fuck this, and I threw it in the trash can.
Swisher Sweets, I forgot. Those were the other ones that we used to um, appropriate on Moss.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I hypothetically, you could imagine a situation where I worked at Quiznos and I was 19 and my coworker was 17 and he needed someone to buy to buy his nicotine fixes, and I may hypothetically in this situation I might have supplied those for him. I wonder what the statute of limitations is on buying cigarettes for minors.
Furthermore, I wonder what the statute of limitations is, considering that very party store we used to patronize is now defunct and no longer there. It's now like a massage parlor or something sketchy like that.
Mm. Yeah, I'm kind of guessing they're not going to come after you.
Probably not.
I mean, this is a pretty big podcast. A lot of people are going to hear it, but I think you're probably safe. A lot of flavored smokes are banned in places. Even menthols in Canada are banned.
Yeah, dude, I remember as a kid. This was before I was smoking because I was in like elementary school. I wasn't cool yet, but I remember one of my buddy's grandfathers used to go over to his house. He used to smoke cherry cigarettes back when that was a thing. Back
Huh.
uh, back before old Barry Obama um, banned them, banned the flavored cigarettes.
It's kind of, yeah.
You were gonna go with that.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll leave that conversation.
He didn't
for
ban
another
the
day.
menthols. He left the Newports.
Conrad Festung says, whatever you do, just don't do kratom. That shit is mad sus. I actually did kratom for a long time, and it was, I didn't I didn't have the experience that some people have coming off of it, but it wasn't pleasant. It was long and kind of annoying. They did studies and it tanks your testosterone massively. Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, especially the volume that people do of kratom. You know, they're like, oh, you know, it's this leaf that people chew, and like, yeah, like they pop in some kratom and they like chew on a leaf for a while. You get this stuff like hyper processed and super densely packed into a bunch of capsules, and then you do like 10 of them. It's like this is a far cry from like chomping on a leaf every now and then. All right. Let's get into the thoughts of our old buddy Kurt. This is a very interesting piece. I haven't completely finished it yet. I got through probably half of it, and then decided I just wanted to do it on the show here because he has some very interesting thoughts, and in particular, we were, as Cooper and I were discussing this, we were noting the tone that he has, and he seems to have had a tone shift to go along with the recent vibe shift. So this is on the Good Old Boys Substack. I guess it's not the Good Old Boys Substack because that's actually a thing. It's on graymirror.substack.com, and as he always says, it's gray with, what does he say, gray with an A, the American way.
That's right.
A conversation about monarchy.
I gotta go do dad stuff real quick.
Yep.
They're screaming upstairs.
Yeah, we can hear him.
I'll mute.
Yeah. A conversation about monarchy. Now and for the foreseeable future, any election is either plenary or nugatory. One David Volodchko, whom I know not otherwise, but who writes about communism, fascism, and radical movements, and who was apparently fired by the Seattle Times for improperly comparing Hitler to Lenin, skillfully earning the ire of both fascists and progressives, cold emailed and requested an exchange of open letters. Here is his, and there's a link here if you want to go read that yourself. Volodchko, one of many fine recovering journalists in America, seems to have his head screwed on tight, with limits. He can stand an impressive amount of contemporary small arms fire, but he is not yet fully armored. When he takes on heavy words like monarchy and slavery, he pops his turret like a leopard driving over a TM-62. Still, his heart is in the right place, and we wish him well as a fellow traveler on the long and stony road to truth. Are we there yet? This is great. This is just... Cooper and I were discussing this earlier, so I can speak on behalf of him. Both of us just love his prose. We love the voice and the style that he writes with, and I know some people really don't like it. They just kind of want him to get to the point. And he actually references that. There's a little meta comment here later on. But for me, it's like writing is performance art. It's a very I don't know. I think it's kind of a lost art in the modern era. We just kind of tend to have this very dry, sterile, just strictly analytical, rational writing. And sometimes it's nice to have a little flair to enjoy the process as you're reading. So he makes the analogy here of this journalist can stand an impressive amount of contemporary small arms fire, meaning he doesn't instinctually flinch and run away from any controversial political topic the way the typical regime journalist does. But he's not yet fully armored. Once he gets to words like monarchy and slavery, then boop, he pops his turret. So his heart's in the right place. He's moving along the same trajectory that many of us have moved along. The long and stony road to truth. And this is a thing that Yarvin, if you've read Unqualified Reservations, he's often written this way as as describing us. I think it's a very, very effective literary technique. We're talking like describing it as we're going along on a journey, and I'm here to help kind of explicate the journey as we go. And he has this self awareness that a lot of the stuff he's talking about is difficult and hard to take on, and is really challenging the sort of things we have been conditioned to believe. Back to the reading. I cannot at this time post my full response to Volozhko. Hopefully at some point it will become available. Thank you, dear readers, for your patience in this cold, dry winter of content. Things are happening. There will be more interesting stuff soon. But let me respond to a couple of points. So you just missed me. I just read the first 2 paragraphs here, and I just had a long diatribe about how much you and I both really enjoy Yarvin's writing style and his tone and the performative nature of his prose.
Do you wanna hear the lore?
Yeah.
Behind the
meltdown?
Yeah. So they're supposed to be cleaning their room. The youngest one, she wasn't helping. This made him mad. She came downstairs to try to tell me that it's, she's not helping, but it's his fault. And so I shoo her off. She goes upstairs. He shuts the door and blocks her for coming upstairs. Because he's like, no, fuck you. And then she tries to open the door, and he finally steps away. The door swings open wide, and she bonks her head on the wall.
And loses her shit.
Yeah, then they're up there screaming at each other.
How old are they? Like 6 and 4?
Yeah. And then I get up there, and he's standing there like while she's over in the chair crying and holding her head and being really performative and making a big thing out of it.
Being a woman.
Yeah, right. Like, so what'd you do? And he's like, I accidentally, and then, whatever. It was not accidental. But
it was like earlier, Eastwood was caterwauling downstairs, and I walked down there and I saw him, and he had like tears in his eyes and stuff, and looked all sad and pathetic. And I was like, you all right, man? What's wrong? And I went around the corner, and Amy's in there, and she's just like irritated. She's just like, ugh. He was having a cow because they're having pretzels for a snack, and she offered him a whole pretzel, and he wanted half a pretzel, and so that was cause for a meltdown.
right.
Kids are the best. The CEO, the king, and the president. Volozhko has a genuinely substantive question about monarchy. He wonders what I mean by all this stuff. Do I mean what I'm saying? I do. So let me be really explicit, which I'm usually not, about what I mean. So there's that little meta comment I was referring to, acknowledging that he typically does take the winding road to the point that he's making. He's very Straussian in that sense. So this is him quoting Volozhko. But are you playing word games? One of the reasons I wanted to speak with you was to discover the answer. Are you describing a dictator or a king? Or are you describing a CEO or a president and simply using words like monarch because they're clickbait? Why doesn't unitary executive theory solve the problem for you? Or if you support a king who is elected to 4-year terms, as you have said that you do, why do you object to a president? Why not advocate for a more powerful president? After all, you argue that nations should be run like startups and their leaders should be like CEOs. Is a president not more like a CEO than a king? Ending the quote. It sounds like the guy's sincere. Like you can hear the shit livery in there, but this seems like a genuine inquiry. Back to Yarvin. In theory, yes, I do, quote, advocate for a more powerful president. But, quote, unitary executive theory is a confusing way to say this, despite its correct literal meaning. As a buzzword, as a brand, it has spent too much time in the mouths of people who do not actually mean it. Until this, quote, unitary executive is so much, quote, more powerful than the present office that the president considers both the judicial and legislative branches purely ceremonial and advisory, with the same level of actual sovereignty as Charles III today, the unitary executive will not work. This is interesting because this phrase unitary executive theory has been bouncing around recently. Vivek has openly used it, and it's been bandied about among the Project 2025 people. This is one of the connections that I noticed between them. So he's saying that his vision of what a unitary executive would be that the president would consider the judicial and legislative branches ceremonial and advisory. So they're there to provide advice and basically keep up appearances, but they're essentially like the modern British monarch, which is basically a ceremonial position. In any supposedly balanced regime, which is somehow made out of the government we have now, the executive will not be unitary. It will just pretend to be. We already have a pretend executive, so why care? So that no one, including David Volochko, is confused, let me explain clearly and exactly what a realistic monarchical transformation in the US means and looks like. You can be confident that anyone in DC you hear talking about a unitary executive is not talking about this, regardless of the literal meaning of the words. Our administrative regime. For the Congress and the court, what comes around goes around. After a century in which Article 1 and Article 3 reduced Article 2 to ceremonial status, it is now their turn in the barrel. The wisdom of the founders in allowing the anacyclotic cycle to operate by failing to specify the precedence of the branches is once again confirmed. Now, anacyclotic is a term I've never heard before. He links to social cycle theory and Kiklos, or am I pronouncing that right? Cooper, I know you. What?
Kiklos?
Kiklos?
I don't know. It depends where the accent is, but yeah.
It looks like the accent would be on the Y.
Kiklos, yeah.
Kiklos means cycle, a term used by some classical Greek authors to describe what they considered as the cycle of governments in a society. And then ana means like up, like to increase. So I suppose the anacyclotic cycle would be basically enshrining this social evolution thing into the structure of the government. The wisdom of the founders in allowing the anacyclotic cycle to operate by failing to specify the precedence of the branches is once again confirmed. Ambiguity in a sovereign contract, no contract at all since no superior power enforces it, is an intentional loophole through which contingent history can squeeze. Any of the branches, 1, 2, or 3, can ascend to sovereignty over the others without violating the letter or even the spirit of the Constitution. As FDR said in his first inaugural address, this document has lasted so long because it is so flexible. Our administrative, judicial, legislative regime, whose current supremacy is absolute, can only be replaced by a new regime of absolute executive supremacy. There is no way to split the difference and return to balanced or limited government. Even in theory, contending equal powers are unstable. Such a regime has rarely, if ever, existed. This is a point that he's made throughout all of his writings, that sovereignty is not something that can be distributed. Distributed sovereignty is no sovereignty. Sovereignty has to be and tends toward being vested in a single entity.
Yeah, we're all king.
Yeah, right. We're all king, so no one is king. What's very clever about this, and I think this is a bit of a shift, and I think it's probably a strategic shift. You heard a little bit of this in his conversation with Charlie Kirk.
We're getting some of the best usernames lately. Palladian Autistic Virgin Coomer Kang. That's pretty good.
That is pretty good. We got the schizos. I like it. What was I saying?
Charlie Kang.
Oh,
Charlie Kirk.
Charlie Kang.
Chuck Dirk.
Yeah, Chuck Dirk. So old Chuck Dirk, he when Yarvin was talking to him, and if you haven't listened to that, I strongly recommend it. It's been taken off the podcatchers, but if you search for it and you go to the podcast episode page, it's still there. It's from January 17, I think, if that narrows it down for you. In that episode, Yarvin did a really good job of presenting the case for an elected monarch to a boomer audience. And that's essentially what he's doing here, where he's not saying, oh, we need to, the Constitution is ineffectual, we need to move beyond it, we need to move outside it. He's saying, no, what I'm describing is how you use the Constitution to to establish the pretext and then to take the reins of power constitutionally in a way that lends itself to an elected monarch. So the way the Constitution has been set up with three equal branches, none of them actually given supremacy, any of them theoretically, according to the letter and spirit of the Constitution, can exercise supremacy. And what we've seen now is basically the legislative and judicial branches have turned the executive branch into an administrative bureaucracy that they control, and there is no executive branch. So by reasserting the power and the authority of the executive branch, you can do this within the frame of the Constitution, pursuant to the Constitution. That's essentially the point he's making. Taylor Brown says managed democracies to produce the managed monarch. Sure, yeah. The real end of executive authority is the replacement of arbitrary command by legislated process, administration by administrative law. An executive under law is not an executive at all. To be the executive, you necessarily have to be outside the law. We're living in the Babylonian captivity of Article 2, which can only be ended by a radical and unconditional set of executive restoration. An American reassertion of the ancient English rule that the king is above the law. So there's an appeal to history that this isn't necessarily generating something new. This is a new version of something ancient. Again, the Constitution does not specify the precedent of the branches. Over the last century, the Article 2 branch has been marginalized. While individual presidents, mainly FDR, but also Wilson and LBJ, have exerted true executive authority, these reigns of power have been increasingly informal, irregular, and exceptional. Look at the past. The control of the White House over the so-called executive branch has only dwindled over the century. How different is D.C. in practice today from the structure Wilson himself described in congressional government? We don't have an executive branch. We have an administrative branch, the creature of the Article 2 and Article 3 branches. The root of this branch is the exceptional, in the sense of Carl Schmitt, decision of Madison v. Marbury in 1803, in which Article 3 seized sovereignty by a successful act of arbitrary power. History squeezes in. Again, the founders designed their system to be arbitrary at the highest level, a concession to the wise, subtle, and permanent principle that might makes right. For in what other way was right ever made? Might has to make it, or no one will. Duh. Here's some more. This is just pure Yarvinese right here. This sort of stuff, the really concise, clever statement of some of these principles like that. Like, for in what other way was right ever made? Might has to make it, or no one will. That's just something like that's a banger tweet right there.
Reminds me of the one intelligent thing Kyle ever said in the Discord. Might makes rights.
Yes. That is, if you want political philosophy distilled to a 3-word phrase, might makes rights. Brent Taylor says the more normie-pilled professionals in the engineering world are becoming activated. Yes, many such cases. And that's part of what's, I think, really valuable about it. I have this sort of cynical instinct where I'm like, yeah, this is all fine and good, trying to like frame your political radicalism in a way that's amenable to the boomer cons. But at the same time, like if anything is ever going to happen, this is how it's going to have to happen. It's going to happen within the context of the Constitution. It's just a reality of the existing state of things. Yeah, you could just like go take a break for 100 years and come back and see where things are at, and then say, oh, maybe we could do something without the Constitution now. But the fact of the matter is that if you're going to make any sort of inroads into power, you're going to have to do it within this context, which is why the Caesar figure, as repeated throughout history, is always an insider who becomes an outsider. It's never the other way around. At least not that I can ever think of.
What was that engineering world of becoming activated? That reminds me of what was that really stupid movie with was it Jared Leto? You know, do you remember all the memes like the Morbin, like Morbius? Is that what it was called?
Oh, it kind of rings a bell. I'm not sure.
Yeah, never mind.
Okay. How? What?
Just we be Morbin, dude.
All Jared Leto movies are terrible. I like um what's his, I just forgot the name of his band. 30 Seconds to Mars. Takes me back to like high school.
It's Morbin time. That's right.
All right, back to Yarvin. However the present came to be, it is what it is. Now and for the foreseeable future, either this administrative regime is absolutely subjected to the arbitrary discretion of the president, or there is no real president, which means there is no real election. Because nothing can change what the real Washington has long since become. The only power remaining to the Americans to either dissolve it or endorse it. Any future presidential election under this system, therefore, is either plenary or nugatory. Perhaps at some future date, we could again experiment with a mixed government of checks and balancing. Again, today, in the real world we live in, there are only two real political choices before us: eternal bureaucracy or elective monarchy. Again, as anyone inside the Beltway who is smarter than a golden retriever knows, there is no executive branch. There is an administrative branch. Legally, under our system of entirely factitious and increasingly comical constitutional law, which in turn hath begat administrative law, the Article 2 voters might as well elect Charles III. Our administrative branch is entirely the creature of Articles 1 and 3, the judicial and legislative branches. It is no surprise that this weird hybrid mutant has failed. The administrative branch is run according to process, a process dictated not by the president, but by the Congress and courts. This process was set down long ago in what some have called America's real Constitution. I refer not to the Civil Rights Act of 1965, but the Administrative Procedure Act of 1946. The APA completes the transition from the quasi-executive FDR wartime regime to the post-war oligarchic bureaucracy. The monarchy to oligarchy transition is not unusual when a monarch dies without a strong successor. Is it reversible? Yes. Nothing in political science is forever. No empire is forever, etc. Just pointing out here that the way he's framing this, FDR was the monarch. So the FDR wartime regime was essentially a monarchical regime within which FDR used absolute executive power to set up this bureaucracy that he managed. But then when he died and he didn't have a strong successor, the bureaucracy kicked into motion managing itself. And ever since then, we haven't actually had an executive president. We've had products of the bureaucracy running itself and installing their own patsies. What it is not, however, is incrementally reversible. No one who knows Washington could even conceive of subjugating it to the personal authority of a single executive. And the wisest policy for any such executive would be to dissolve and replace it. Since Joe Biden was a little boy, the budget, policy, organization, and personnel of the executive branch, and even of the White House itself, have been micromanaged by the other two branches. It is impossible to imagine the resulting administrative branch in any way returning to real executive control. Don't bother. Just build a new government.
It's Morbin time.
I don't know this thing at all. I have to look this up.
It's so dumb.
It's Morbin time. Why do I feel like a boomer here? I don't understand the meme.
Yeah, I don't even understand the meme. I just got a case of the giggles.
Yeah, I'm looking at knowyourmeme.com describing the meme, and I don't understand it. I've been left behind by the schizoids. Is it one of these like Zoomer things where the whole point of the meme is that it's a meme and it doesn't make sense, and that's part of the reason why it makes sense?
As I understand the lore, and I could be totally off on this because I've not looked into it at all. I only vaguely know about it because it existed on my periphery for a while. Is that it was just a really shitty low budget movie or something like that, or it was a really shitty movie and you got a bunch of Zoomers who really hyped it up,
Uh-huh.
and made the the executives, or basically similar to the Game Stonks thing, where they poured a whole bunch of movie into this because there was a bunch of fake hype generated online, and then the movie just fucking tanked. And all that's good for is memes.
Okay, I follow. Yeah, there's so many different Zoomer memes that have been built out of this sort of thing where you begin ironically liking something that just specifically because it's completely nonsensical
Yeah,
or just stupid, and so everyone likes it ironically, but then it gets to the point where people start to actually like it unironically, and yeah, this
yeah. They made the movie go back to the box office. Financial disaster. They hyped them into a shitty movie that no one wanted to see.
oh, that's amazing.
It's, it's Morbin time, dude.
How could you be blackpilled in a world like this?
Yeah,
Like-
Taylor Brown says it's the Marvel equivalent of The Room. That's a really good way of putting it.
They memed them into dumping so much money into a movie that was doomed to fail. Oh, see, these are our guys. You just have to figure out how to activate them. Oh man. We've got 56 viewers watching live on YouTube right now and 16 likes. Hit the like button, people. All right. Don't bother, just build a new government. Process has simply eaten all significant executive discretion of the president, leaving only a few hackneyed, predictable, totally reactive issues and decisions to occupy the day in the TV cameras. Indeed, for someone who has so little actual impact on the world around him, the president is remarkably busy. He himself does not generally notice that he has no power, especially if he is a Democrat and flows with the power. Although impact of elections in either direction is marginal, an effective Democratic presidency is still a political brake on all the craziest stuff the agencies want to do. It is true that outside his numerous ceremonial duties, the president makes decisions. Making decisions, deciding exceptional cases which lower levels of the hierarchy cannot or do not wish to process by their rules, is the role of managers in a process-based bureaucracy. But making decisions is not an executive function. It is a reactive function. The maker of mere decisions does not decide the exception. He decides what to do with an exception, not when to make an exception. I think this is a really valuable observation, even outside the political sphere, if it's possible for such a thing to exist, that making a decision does not mean you're the one in charge. Making the decision of when decisions get made is what actually puts you in charge. Forcing decisions is what puts you in charge. So if a bureaucracy is forcing decisions on a quote-unquote executive, that executive is a manager. A great example of the differentiation here is Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a true executive. Steve Jobs was a true executive. These guys were not, it's not that they never make reactive decisions. It's that what differentiates them is the fact that they also make proactive decisions. They're the ones that force the bureaucracy to react to them rather than reacting to the bureaucracy. And he certainly does not decide what the rule is. Deciding what the rule is must be left to some inexorable historical or collective process meant to be mechanical and above mere human judgment, even if it just means accepting past patterns and events as sovereign precedents. The process is either inexorable and sensible, or inexorable and deranged, or in fact steered by mere human beings under the covers for reasons that are either sensible or deranged. Grasping the sovereign wand. To escape the sickening, ever-growing coils of DC's Gordian knot, American voters have only one realistic option. They need to elect a president who clearly states his intention and preparedness to take over the entire American government, assuming plenary power, not just in response to any specific event or emergency, but immediately upon his inauguration, when his democratic authority is at its strongest. This isn't even unprecedented in American history, not even in the lives of those now living. Read FDR's first inaugural. specifically the part where he demands the powers of a general resisting an enemy invasion in 1933. These were the powers FDR needed to create what, during his informal dictatorship for life, was more or less his personal executive monarchy, then, after his death, became the formalized administrative state. To dismantle this vast and ancient growth, the vacant throne of FDR is not even enough. Today, the powers of the general resisting an enemy invasion are insufficient. So, FDR created his throne by demanding the powers of a general who is resisting an enemy invasion. And what Yarvin is saying is, even that isn't enough today. The powers of the general who is resisting an enemy invasion are insufficient to actually take control of the administrative state. No, the new president will need the powers of the enemy general. Why fuck around? Haven't we done enough fucking around? Do we like it? Fucking around? Is it fun? This phrase here was, I read this and I still read it in Jason's voice, Jason from the 2-Bit podcast. This just sounds exactly like how he would talk about this. Americans now see the Gordian knot. Either we cut it or we pluck ineffectually at a thread or two. Boomers, RFK Jr. voters, awake, join us. Can't you see that the whole government hates you and has for your whole life? Put down the bong and tie back your gray ponytail. We're going to DC. This time we're going to create change. We're tired, we Americans declare, of gooning it every 4 Novembers to the likes of George Bush, Barry Obama, or John McCain. We're even done with endless edging for America's funniest professional frontman. Having fully abandoned the sin of Onan, we shall not cast our political seed upon the ground. We mean our votes to count. We have no confidence at all in our present institutions. And we, the people, who art sovereign, appeal to high heaven, and do solemnly declare this a bareback election. The birthday girl is due for a historic surprise. In the bareback election, if our candidate wins, we expect him to take full power. We trust in God to guide him. If the other candidate wins, we implore him to do the same. Maybe God will guide him too. If not, surely the Lord has some other plan. But we think he wants us to have one too. In case you're too afraid of the wrath of God, 2024 will not be a bareback election. No, it will be an ordinary American show election. So you have more than 4 years. The bareback president makes exactly one promise. He will hold himself accountable to the people who elected him by holding a free and fair national election in 4 years. In all other matters, he will exercise unconditional executive authority over the whole American government. This for him will be the Constitution for the next 4 years. By voting bareback, the American electorate collectively decides that its country is in a state of emergency. They declare that this administrative regime has failed and lost their confidence, along with the sovereignty they had delegated to it. They reassume their full sovereignty and delegate it unconditionally to a rebooted Article 2 branch. This is pure distilled Yarvin, and I love every last bit of it. There's an irony to his writing style, which is funny. Very Gen X, very proto-Zoomer, where he's like, even this here, the thing with where he mentions God. Someone on Twitter spurred out about this, about how Christians should be horrified that he's using God in these terms, and he's an atheist Jew and he's just spitting in our face when he talks about God this way. You are retarded.
You're gay.
He's not using God cynically, especially if you listen to anything else that he's ever written or said. He considers himself an atheist, but he recognizes that God is a dynamic that exists. The phenomenon of God is real and is a variable that has to be taken into consideration. So in this sense, I think he's much more perennialist than he is atheist in the way those terms are commonly used. He's not using God cynically here. He's using God as to describe something more like the forces of cause and effect in the universe.
Kind of reminds me of that dork on Twitter a while back who was like, apparently some spurg on Twitter, like insulted the czar or something like that. And you get one of these ortho faggots who was this really long diatribe where he was like, "Oh, when the Byzantine Empire is established, when the New World Order Orthodox Empire is established, you'll be groveling at our feet for mercy, and we won't give it, or something. Do you remember that?
He said something about like that you will be what's the word for when one country takes a criminal and takes him to another country?
Exile?
No,
Vassal?
no, like X not exfiltrate, not exhibit, not what is the word I'm looking for? Extradite. Thank you. Yes, extradite. Now everyone's going to say extradite. Thank you guys. He said something about how like when the Christian empire has been restored, you're going to be extradited to Russia to face prosecution for crimes of blasphemy or something like that. It's just
and he's saying it seriously too.
Yeah, like
no irony at all. Just pure autism. Cannot read the room. He's standing there in the corner, like the meme where everyone's dancing and you got the guy in the corner. He's over there like, they don't know I have autism. We know.
we know you have autism, buddy. Oh, man. So the bareback president. Now, for those of you who maybe aren't putting two and two together here, the reference to the sin of Onan was the in the Bible, he was the guy who he withdrew himself from his wife and spilled his seed upon the ground. The sin of Onanism.
Isn't that was it Judah, one of Judah's sons?
Yeah, I think so. It was that time frame at least. The sin of Onanism is often a euphemism for masturbation. So he's saying we're not going to be doing this masturbatory boomer truth regime constitution thing. We're going to be giving her the real deal here. No protection. No protection. We're going for it. There. Yeah, we're jamming it up in there and we are shooting our wad. We've got one opportunity to make it happen and we're going to blow that spaghetti out there. The bareback president. The first job of our new constitutional executive branch is to entirely liquidate the old unconstitutional administrative branch. Not to reform the state, nor to eliminate the state, but to replace the state, while it is running without any turmoil or disorder. While not easy, this is easier than most people think. A bareback election elects a bareback president. He is not just more powerful. He is orders of magnitude more powerful, at least in his authority over the executive branch. As Stalin observed, quantity has a quality all its own. To obtain the people's consent to true plenary authority, then use it to drive any plan that could have been executed at much lower power levels, is mere incompetence and will certainly fail. That would be yet another case of fishing in the Rubicon. And this is part of my concern with Project 2025. I think they're on the right path. I think this is the track that one ought to be taking, yes. But my sense is that given the BoomerCon influence that's still present there because of this is the best that we have to offer that can put together something like this. It's very much a new right thing, but it definitely has a lot of boomer truth regime elements still within it, which I think at the moment of crisis will likely cause them to remain fishing in the Rubicon rather than continuing to roam. I would be happy to be, proven otherwise. And there's always the possibility that it will. That's how these things work throughout history is, you kind of have to go through it to find out what's going to happen. Sometimes it's not going to happen. Sometimes it does happen. And when it does happen, nobody ever expected it to. In hindsight, people develop the stories to say, oh, here's how you knew it was coming. Here's how you knew. Here, you could see the signs. But you could see the signs in retrospect. You couldn't necessarily see the signs at the time. Sanji says you can't put down institutions in 5 years. Let's be real. You can't until you can. That's the whole point. When it happens quickly and suddenly. What's the saying? How did you go bankrupt? Slowly at first and then all at once. That's how these sorts of things always wind up happening. $5 super chat from TK. He says, I like to imagine Yarvin rapping this to the tune of "Lose Yourself. You only get one shot." Yes,
Spaghetti.
we need a video of Curtis Yarvin rapping "Lose Yourself" by Eminem and a
No, we
rap
don't.
battle.
No, we don't.
Those of you who are experienced in the use of these new AI video things, please produce this
Nope.
for us.
Don't do that.
We would like to make money off of it.
That you can't put down institutions in 5 years. That comment makes me think like I live in the land of road construction, being in Michigan. And I am not anti-rap. I'm a big fan of Run the Jewels, for example. I just Eminem from like early 2000s, the early aughts.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard it all a million times and I just don't care anymore. Anyway, so
You're kind of like someone from Seattle who's like burned out on Nirvana.
yeah, right. Yeah, I live like an hour from Detroit. I've heard it, dude. So the road construction thing, like one thing that drives me insane is you'll have road construction projects in Michigan that are like years long for them to like tear up and repave like a 2 mile stretch of highway. And I remember looking back when, the whole like interstate highway system was first being built under, is it Eisenhower? It was something like I-75 from the top of Michigan all the way down to Florida. It took them like 2 years to build all of that.
Mm-hmm.
2 years to do all of that. And then it takes fucking 4 years to do 2 miles in Michigan now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just because of bureaucracy and, you get these contracts and job security and unions, and it's a big whole mess. But like things can get done. A lot can get done in a short amount of time if you have the will. Is what I'm trying to say. Are people talking shit while I'm ranting?
Taylor Brown said Kurt Cobain was the first one to burn out on Nirvana.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is one thing that Yarvin mentioned on his episode with Chuck Dirk. He said that at the time of the New Deal era, the time of the FDR regime, he said you had the equivalent of the Silicon Valley tech bros streaming into Washington, and you had the infrastructure or even the lack of infrastructure to be able to say something like, here's a budget of hundreds of millions of dollars. You're going to go set up the Tennessee Valley Authority and electrify the whole that whole region. And you could just go and start in on this project and set it up and get it done really quickly. Now it'd be impossible. And so you're getting a brain drain from Washington because of that. The equivalent class of people who would have staffed and made the whole New Deal era possible, all of those people have been headed into Silicon Valley and other sorts of things since then. So I think that's part of the significance of what's happening now is you're getting those more pragmatic, get shit done, let's build shit and do great things. That sort of energy is now getting reinterested in innovating in the political sphere. Who knows how long this process will take, but the arc of history bends towards those types of guys. Okay. To obtain the people's consent to true plenary authority, then use it to drive any plan that could have been executed at much lower power levels, is mere incompetence and will certainly fail. That would be yet another case of fishing in the Rubicon. Granted real executive power, why on earth would a new president keep the existing executive branch? These organizations are not habitually used to being directed by him, but rather by policies, processes, budgets, personnel, even principles mandated by the Congress. The new management of FTX might as well keep the old traitors. The new president has kind of an interesting double meaning there. The new president will not just theoretically claim the powers of a conquering enemy general. For these powers to make sense, he needs to govern like a conquering enemy general, using direct command of the police to maintain public stability as he spins up a totally new executive branch, run like a startup with startup quality people. The new president will not, of course, just change the policies of the new regime. He would not even just replace the personnel, security forces excluded, of the old regime. Radical as they might seem, these measures are wholly inadequate. It is not even enough to dissolve the organizational structures of the old regime or even demolish its physical buildings. Any new regime worthy of the name will need to be ready to rewrite even its philosophical principles. The new president will not just take over the federal government, but also state, local, and tribal government. Moreover, inasmuch as he finds any organization, public or private, to have become a de facto state agency, he will nationalize and restructure it. Also, he is likely to discover many new problems that the government isn't solving, but should be. And this new infrastructure will run at or near startup efficiency. It must be run like Apple, not like the Department of Transportation. If this is what a unitary executive means, I am all for a unitary executive. But when I hear people saying unitary executive, and I listen to the other things they're saying, it sounds like they mean something different. That's why all I want for my birthday is a bareback president. Before we continue here, Sanji back here, I wanted to reply to something. Or no, it wasn't Sanji. It was Javier Oliva said, I hate to be the sand in the Astroglide here, but all of this sounds like bad fan fiction. So it's much more likely that we will lumber along fat, dumb, and watching sports ball / porn for decades. Yeah, I mean, I think the part of the utility of him writing this is he's laying out what this sort of thing would actually have to entail, which serves a dual purpose. One, it clarifies the magnitude of the crisis. And two, it begins laying a track for if you want to do something like this, for anyone out there who may be reading this and in a position to do anything about this, this is the angle you're going to have to take. It begins with bringing this into the public consciousness, laying out a potential trajectory, and then people run with that and start developing other things. We've seen this happen 16, 17 years ago. Yarvin was writing about a lot of this stuff. He was writing about the cathedral before anybody knew what the cathedral was. Now everyone knows what the cathedral is. So I'm inclined to buy the guy's prescience. And I do think that history is bending toward this sort of happening. Whether it's going to happen within the next election cycle or within the next, 10 election cycles, either way, it's going to happen. So it's worth thinking about. The transition program. A new president who is not immediately ready for unlimited regime change will fail. His potential powers will evaporate rapidly after his inauguration as he falls into the bad old groove of a ceremonial presidency. The transition must begin as soon as he steps off the inaugural stage. The preparation for the transition must have begun months at least, and years ideally before that day. There are all sorts of organizational tools that can be prepared in advance to make our great nation's first bareback inauguration since 1933 go as smoothly as possible. Signaling the sovereignty of the new regime is especially important. There is a reason that the classical 20th century coup heads straight for the TV tower. A regime change must first become visible. It must feel like an earthquake in which power structures which previously seemed as immovable as the mountains shake or crumble into dust. The new regime is far more real than the old, and it must immediately make this known. Yet the entire transition must remain orderly. Is there a huge difference between life in the public and private sectors? One big company is going out of business. Another is being founded. No one's being dragged away and shot. It's not the 20th century. At most, a week of COVID-style lockdown should be enough to secure the new regime. Not only are the Americans of today, especially the blue state ones, no Minutemen, but unlike most historical urban populations, they do not even know how to be a mob. Today, civilian numbers are as irrelevant to contests of force as in the 13th century. 21st century Americans are a civilized people. We do not chimp. Let's go through some critical steps in a real 21st century regime change. Here is what a real unitary executive would do if he was a real dictator on the first day. Libs, if you are used to squeaking fearfully about far-right conservatives, this very reasonable and, if anything, mild program, prostate gland quiver. And yet, nobody needs to get shot or even thrown out on the street. While there are many things to say against a government running on a soft currency, the power to print money sure makes it easy to run a regime change. All the civil soldiers of the old regime, and there are a lot of them, can be severed very gently from their positions. Arbitrary level of structural change can be achieved without severing any heads, even metaphorically. The new president is as ruthless as Stalin, yet as nice as Jimmy Carter. The faster the transition process proceeds, the better. Intermediate states of power are dangerous and ineffective. The old regime must be dissolved as fast as possible, which means that the president must establish unilateral control over the whole state as fast as possible, ideally creating entirely new mechanisms for command, control, and signaling across the entire fabric of state order. Let's take a very cursory look.
I got about 5 minutes left.
Okay, sounds good. You have any parting thoughts you want to jump in with and just interrupt me?
Okay, I gotta go. Gotta go to the gym.
Twink maxing.
Twink Maxon.
Security. The essential desideratum of any regime change is unilateral central control of the security forces, mainly the police. In America, the military is normally unarmed and not particularly equipped to resist the police, making the latter the primary focus of power. Also, their command connection to the president is much simpler than that of the police. Unless, as an immediate consequence of the election, the president is not in direct command of every law enforcement officer in the United States, he is not on a success path. Personal and professional loyalties must always be distinguished. Yes, the security forces personally are likely to overwhelmingly support the president, especially in the rank and file. Yet they are sworn forces, and their personal support for the president does not translate easily, if at all, to their professional actions. Both these forces should be used as strongly as possible, creating a new emergency command structure in which loyalty is both personal and institutional. Security forces in a regime change generally cannot be replaced, though units can be disbanded and individuals purged. They can be reorganized in two ways: reusing the old chain of command or creating a new chain of command. As usual, all possible energy must be applied in parallel. Sovereign actors or actors seeking sovereignty should always have unlimited confidence and act as strongly as possible. No fishing in the Rubicon. The way to test a command is to make it a signal. Ideally, within a week, every law enforcement officer in America is wearing a red armband to show that he follows the new president's direct, unconditional command. Forces, units, or individuals who resist this order need to be stripped of their badges immediately. This signal can be ordered either by executive command under emergency authority, or by disorganized personal loyalty, or even by a parallel organization within law enforcement, the Wildcat Police Union. If millions of armbands are hard to rustle up, a subtle signal, like a piece of tape, will do. Anyone can get tape stuck on their uniform. All of these supporters can be organized into a parallel command structure that follows the official hierarchy, unless nodes in that hierarchy do not show the signal. Then the new structure's first priority is to route around these nodes. Ubiquitous phones and messaging apps make it very easy to construct effective ad hoc hierarchies. The most drastic form of action, if all top-down operations fail, which is possible in some parts of the nation with strong local resistance to the new regime, is the police strike. This also requires the president to pre-organize his supporters in police departments, either passively through propaganda, actively through a classic cell structure, or virtually through some kind of anonymous app. When the police all agree to do nothing, never implausibly deniable in an era when they do almost nothing, jurisdictions which resist the president's order will realize that they themselves cannot maintain their own order. These cities generally contain or are near centers of criminal culture. Criminals learn quickly that they can pillage with impunity. Eventually, everywhere becomes Chaz. After a sufficient dose of this purge, civilians in these jurisdictions, regardless of their ideology, are quite disciplined to oppose any force capable of restoring order. They would welcome ISIS. No authority should ever be dissolved without a parallel replacement process. After an initial process in which its only purpose is the restoration of order, the new security state needs to return to the restoration of law. Some power besides its own command structure will have to make decisions about what is right or wrong for the cops to do. But again, it is best to replace old habits of power. One way to make sure the new legal system is free from the corruptions of the old is to start with a European legal code based on the Roman civil law. This way, not even former lawyers will have an advantage in the contest for legal authority. There will be a lot of capable people looking for new careers. They should all have a chance to train and test into the law.
Yeah. Well, I'm out.
All right. See you, big boy.
Bye, everybody. See you later. How do I leave? You click leave. Goodbye.
Information. The mainstream press can and must be abolished within a week. The fabled MSM is just a set of media companies whose quasi-governmental status is blessed by history. History has withdrawn her blessing, and nothing is more fragile than a company. Its doors can be locked. Its servers can be seized. Any great nerve center of power, like the old Stasi office, becomes in the next regime a subject for mere investigation. One critical task of any new regime is a complete and devastating understanding of the old regime, just as every new Chinese dynasty wrote the authoritative history of the last dynasty. Imagine writing the story of the 20th century through the internal records of the New York Times. It will be done. Get me a little excited here. Nothing is more fragile than a company, yet nothing is more resilient than a market. Eradicating the production infrastructure of some product is ultimately useless until the demand is eradicated as well. Unless the desire for a product is eradicated along with its factories, the product will return. Capitalism will find a way. And the infrastructure in journalism and education is not organizational structure or even brand loyalty, but human capital. Like it or not, these businesses employ many talented and energetic Americans. The president does not feel like executing them. Maybe they should be happy about this, but they won't be. Even after the irreversible corporate liquidation of all their bases, nests, and hives, the journalists remain as a capable, if temporarily disorganized, army in the field. After their initial defeat by sovereign force, they must be finished off by market forces, eliminating the demand for anything which smells like 20th century journalism. Otherwise, these termites, with the plagues they carry, will burrow right back in. Under the old regime, people read the New York Times for 3 reasons. It made them feel like good people who matter. It had the latest, most reliable information about the world, and it had the best writers. If the president wants the New York Times, by any name, under any ownership, to not exist, to have no reason to exist, all these market forces have to be nullified and defeated. This means only that the state media agency of the new regime can compete with the scattered remnants of old regime journalism, not that it has to win. But just by being better, it can win, which is not at present the case for any New York Times competitor. Yet this outlet should ideally come into existence long before a new regime is born. Under the new regime, there are no leaks. Rather, media and intelligence are unified. The government makes sure it always knows the truth and says as much of it as it can. Under the new regime, reading the old party line does not make anyone feel good and powerful. Since the old regime is irreversibly dead, the party line is no longer aligned even with potential power. And the new regime can hire even better talent. Writers who lack the weird old stench of 20th century ideology. Power, out of power, smells. Consider the fate of Wikipedia under the new regime. Wikipedia is by far the most important source of neutral information on the planet, and also deeply infected with the woke mind virus, as some call it. Does the new regime, A, seize wikipedia.org, B, fork Wikipedia and produce something better, or C, both? Obviously, whenever you have to ask. An effective, well-funded Department of Information should be able to edit a much better public encyclopedia than a bunch of Reddit amateurs in their pajamas. But the Reddit amateurs have all the inertia in the world behind them. But no one, not even Wikipedia, is exempt from the sovereign exception. If the inertia of the mere domain name is captured, and then the new management is superior in every way, the old staff will be defeated. So long as new regime Wikipedia is actually a better encyclopedia than the refugee editors of old Reddit Wikipedia can create, any rebel fork will suffer the fate of all forks. The bums will always lose. Do you believe in the unitary executive? Does your unitary executive have a plan to fork Wikipedia? No? Then he isn't thinking big enough. He shouldn't even get a chance to try. He will just lose and make the problem harder. I think this is a really important observation here. If you try and lose, you make the problem harder. This is why fishing in the Rubicon is such a cell phone. You cannot fish in the Rubicon. If you're going to cross the Rubicon, you have to march to Rome. Which means you need to be taking into consideration everything before this. If you want to fish in the Rubicon, that means you aren't taking into consideration all of these things. You might have seen people in the chat, they're saying, Sanji says, Yarvin doesn't talk that much about the friction that comes with his plan, against his plan. Taylor says, destroying the corporate press is the stuff ecstasy is made of. Someone else said something seems fanciful. This does seem fanciful. That's the point. The point is that this is what it will take. Now, that doesn't mean this is unaccomplishable. It means now is not the time. If it seems fanciful at the time, That's not an argument against it per se. It's an argument in favor of the idea of being prepared for it. And this sort of preparation has to be distributed among a large segment of the population. Not a majority, obviously. It's always small minorities that move these things. But there has to be understanding and cooperation at the very least. Not necessarily coordination, but cooperation across significant swaths of the population. So you put something out like this, and it begins bouncing around and percolating around in these cultures, and people begin getting a greater idea of what time it is. Americans are too attracted by the idea of spontaneous order replacing sovereignty. Spontaneous order, like the benign Darwinian competition of capitalist economics, is a tremendously useful tool of sovereignty, but it is only a tool. To cede sovereignty to a spontaneous order is an incorrect, damaging, and ineffective use of the tool. To cede sovereignty to Wikipedia is simply to corrupt Wikipedia with power. Across our entire society, spontaneous orders have been granted power and thus have been corrupted by power. To uncorrupt them is not to grant them more power, but for power to bring them into order, thus taking the ambition that corrupts them away. Anarchy is always the enemy of liberty. Declaring the official truth is an essential attribute of sovereignty which cannot be removed. And this leads directly to the conclusion that every sovereign country should maintain its own Wikipedia fork, in which it should decide on its own official truth. The truer, obviously, the better. Of course, journalism is just one category of education. While education and even religion are long-term responsibilities of government, they are not immediate needs in the same way as, say, nutrition. The exception is their function as daycare, for which we can do what we did during COVID. If you're a caregiver who needs to stay home because schools are closed, you should get your current salary to homeschool, at least until the new schools are spun up. Apart from a few effective research laboratories in highly applied fields, chemistry, medicine and biology, mathematics, material science, and the like, none of the educational establishment from kindergarten to grad school needs to be preserved. Even the brand names of the institutions can be canceled. Some of the buildings are nice, but not really nice enough to be worth the risk of keeping. All the records must be preserved and processed in a central database. It still matters that you got a degree from Harvard in 2017, even long after there is no Harvard. And as for the minor league sports teams, they can just be minor league sports teams. Just because the university system is ground to fine dust doesn't mean there's no March Madness. Of course, education is good and necessary. Replacing America's education, selection, research, and credentialing infrastructure is essential. But it is essential on the scale of months, not weeks. And, as in almost all of government, creating a new system will be much easier than repairing the old system. A reboot, not a reform. Actual system software experts, such as myself, have a term for changing running code without a reboot. We call it a monkey patch. This may be disrespectful to our primate friends. Finance. As possible, the president takes unilateral control of the Federal Reserve. Like the rest of the administrative state, the Fed is clearly subject to the executive branch. Total power over the Fed, which should be one of the first nodes the new president captures by sudden and determined force, is no more than constitutional government. According to the Constitution, of course, only the Congress can spend money. True. The Fed, however, can create money. And regime change isn't cheap. The Fed also supervises the banks, which control everyone's money. Organizations and persons hostile to the new president will find it hard to operate with their accounts frozen. The American financial system has become a vast mandatory casino which defies the rules of both common sense and good accounting. Reorganizing this casino into something sane is more complex than can be covered here. It involves fixing the supply of money and ensuring that banks match every borrower with a lender. But broadly speaking, it is easy to collapse the whole rickety structure that 20th century electronic finance made out of century paper finance into something simple. Everyone's financial portfolio is automatically sold across the board to the Fed. Also, it is a good time for everyone to stop using paper money. If you have paper money, bring it to a bank this week. Next week, it's just paper. Whatever you had, you have dollars in the Fed. And the Fed owns all financial assets. Your house is sold to the Fed at the Zillow price. Your mortgage is now rent. Your equity is now dollars. You can decline this transaction. You shouldn't, because all assets will be repriced and can be bought back at a lower price. No, this is not the right way to run the whole economy permanently. Capitalism is good. But while this is not the right way to run the economy, it is the right way to reboot the economy. Flattening the financial system this way makes it much easier to control crime, of course, and also any kind of anti-government activity. And in the end, the new financial system should have two features. First, it should not have any business cycles or even long-term price trends. Second, no one who does not have alpha about some market should need or want to gamble in it. The only proper consumer finance product is the CD, a long-term loan to the bank. The stock market should be a zero-sum game in which good predictors profit from bad predictors, not a quasi-mandatory public casino. After our conversation with Sean Whelan, I'd go so far as to say that you should just ban the public stock market outright, but I don't know enough to actually make a case for that. One essential sovereign tool in any regime change is financial proscription, the confiscation of large pools of private wealth that would otherwise oppose the new regime. Some of this wealth is institutional, some is individual. At a certain level, money is power. No concentration of surviving old regime power can be ignored. In a regime change, it goes without saying that philanthropic foundations, unless narrowly focused on some specific and deeply apolitical problem, are treated as arms of the state. As such, their assets are forfeited to the USG, and they must accept the direction of the president, who directs them to shut down their offices, give him all their data and records, and put all their staff on federal severance. And if they try to ignore these orders, their credit cards stop working and their lights are turned off. If only this was enough to solve the problem. Alas, the sovereign exception has to go even farther. Fact: most billionaires are progressives. Is this a good thing? Of course it's not a good thing. A billion is a big number, but it's just a number in the computer. The president, being sovereign, has root access to that computer. At a certain level, money is power. Hey, billionaire, how did you earn your money? We know one thing, it was under the old regime. Maybe it was honestly, maybe it wasn't. Let's assume it was. So you deserve to be rich. How rich do you deserve to be? 50 mil? If screening the high net worth individuals for their ideology is too tough, just impose an 8-figure cap on everyone. Because at a certain level, money is power. Be thankful you're not in Rome. In Rome, proscription meant that you would have been killed with your family. Personnel. Rightists tend to obsess about the lack of startup quality right-wing staff. TLDR. This is true, but does not matter in a new executive branch. In an oligarchy, personnel is policy. In a monarchy, personnel execute policy. The CEO actually is in charge of the organization. I know this is hard to imagine for people who have not worked in the private sector. You can tell who his audience is here. He's writing to his own class, many of whom live in on the hill, so to speak. It does not matter what the king's man says to himself in the shower. It matters what he says in the meeting. And if it isn't an effective way to execute the king's policy, why would he say it in the meeting? In a bureaucracy, policy is personnel. The ideology of the organization is the ideology of its staff. But in a true executive monarchy, policy is not personnel. The CEO actually runs the organization. I know this is hard to imagine for people who have not worked in the private sector. Generally, the libs are not truly true believers, just power addicts. In Nazi Germany, they would be the biggest Nazis, lining up apple swastikas on the teacher's desk. To ask whether you have power yet is to ask whether the power addicts is to ask whether the power addicts support you yet. After the fall of the Reich, they became the biggest Democrats or communists around. If Hitler comes back to life, they will be once again in the front row hiling. Power addicts should not be in charge of anything. They should not be sovereign. But when they are in a functional command structure, one in which maximizing their own personal power and being an effective subordinate are the same problem, nothing at all is wrong with using them. The lesson of the ideological reconstructions of Germany and Japan is that public opinion responds to power, even without being repressed. Since in general, the only reason there is a public opinion, the only reason people care about government policy, is the voyeuristic, pornographic, addictive feeling of domination that they feel from supporting some cause. They will not support any obviously impossible cause. A cause that visibly has no chance of succeeding has no way to make anyone high or hard. In any rapid, firm, coordinated, and effective regime change, resistance will seem hopeless while the old regime is still being taken apart. Once it is fully dismantled, the prospect of somehow reassembling it will still be more daunting. Finally, once the new regime has universally demonstrated the incompetence of the old regime, both through historical re-education and by its own vastly superior performance, any remaining interest in reversing the transition will belong to antiquarian cranks. There are still people today who want to restore the Holy Roman Empire, or Coven masks, or something. Whatevs. The new regime is not even right-wing, because right-wing does not mean anything but opposition to left-wing. In the absence of left-wing, it is not that everything is right-wing. Nothing is right-wing, because no opposing force is necessary. Whether rightists understand this or not, generally not, the only rational telos of rightism is the restoration of a stable, responsible, and accountable monarchy in which the destabilizing energies that create leftism do not even exist. In this context, rightism and leftism both will only remain as academic and historical tropes, like Catharism or Lollardy. I'm just going to keep pressing on through here because my voice isn't going to last a whole lot longer. So appreciate you guys commenting, but I'm going to keep going. The unitary executive and the bareback president. Is this what, say, John Yoo wants? I think not, which is why I coined my own ribald term. It is ribald because laughter disrupts the sacred. It is curious to contemplate the mindset of the voter who would support one but not the other. Why? Imagine the Trump voter who wants to give Trump power, but definitely not too much power. Definitely not the power to do this. He wants to be with Trump. He loves Trump, but not that way. Not without protection. Please. Who is this abject boomer? How is he still alive? And still believing in some kind of Norman Rockwell America? Get this man some stem cells and just harvest his vote. The rest of us like to fuck. We're tired of fucking a balloon. If it's not a bareback election, it's a sterile election. When else are we going to reverse our constitutional vasectomy? Will some foreigner have to finally do the deed? Will America have kids with the bull? Will we let ourselves decline this way until some Putin or Xi is ready to step in? The right is not the only option. We can imagine a bareback president coming from the left. If you're a Republican, you have unboomered yourself indeed if you can see the reality that this regime would not even be that different. The rule that structure drives ideology is true even at the executive level. True fact, President Bukele himself, peace be upon him, came from the post-communist Salvadoran left, the FMLN. Once the bareback president is secure, he is always president of the whole country. And the Cold Civil War ends just as Caesar and Augustus ended the conflict of orders in Rome. The mere structure of the old republic was creating the conflict. Caesar was a populist, but populism died with Caesar. On myths and revolutions. The essential problem with the David Volodchko worldview, as with many recovering progressives, Volodchko seems to be some kind of neo-IDW type, always ready to believe that real liberalism has never been tried. No, baby, it's real fascism that has never been tried. Is that his reconsideration of his narrative is historically skin deep. Volodchko is perfectly ready to admit, he knows perfectly well from his real personal life experience, that his entire present world is deeply marinated in deeply false and meretricious political narratives. He knows, as Orwell did, what a struggle it can be even for the smartest and best informed of us to see the noses in front of our faces. In the present, Volodchko has shed his creepy pornographic political romanticism and perhaps learned to see the world as it is. This is the real achievement of a truly mature intellectual. But in the past, he and his ilk remain in the grip of simplistic myths that should not confuse a child. These myths are constantly getting away. For example, he is a big fan of the American Revolution, quoting from Volodchko. I find the calamity and death that comes with many revolutions, as well as their attendant ideological justifications, nothing less than evil. But other revolutions I support. There was no widespread or systematic execution of the British in the wake of the American Revolution. Do you not also see that revolutions vary in type and moral value? Or do you think any upheaval of the status quo is more harmful than the alternative? End quote. No widespread or systematic execution is a hell of a standard. COVID doesn't put everyone on a ventilator either, so everyone should get COVID? I assert that Volodchko, like 99.99% of Americans, and in fact basically everyone in the world today, knows nothing about the American Revolution. Nothing. He is attached to a mere legend. He might as well get his political examples from the Book of Mormon and start talking about what the Nephites did to the Lamanites or something. For example, did you ever notice that there is over a decade between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution? You probably knew that the United States did indeed exist between 1776 and 1789. You probably even know the name of the first Constitution of the United States by that name, the Articles of Confederation. This period was more than just a decade. It was an entire American regime. And it was the regime actually created by the revolution. And it has been totally airbrushed out of history. How can you support the revolution but know nothing at all about the regime it resulted in? What is wrong with you? Head injury? Here is an exercise. Name anyone outside the military who is associated with the Articles of Confederation government, the Congress of the Confederation. Now say something about him. If you got one of these right, you were a trivia nerd. If you got both right, you're a historian. In the public narrative, this period is just gone. It really is like you had a head injury. The truth, to make a really long story really short, is that wallabies of the 1770s did not result in any widespread or systematic execution. Imagine the FDA approving revolution therapy because it does not always entirely kill the patient. They resulted in a regime that did not work and that had to be replaced in America's first radical right-wing coup by Hamilton's quasi-monarchical constitution, whose basic thrust was to install the commanding general of the revolution as a temporary king. Do you know who did know something about the American Revolution? Try John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Do you know what they said about it in their famous exchange of letters late in life? Jefferson wrote, "On the subject of the history of the American Revolution, you ask who shall write it? Who can write it? And who will ever be able to write it? Nobody." Adams responded, "Indeed, I have been so little satisfied with histories of the American Revolution that I have long since ceased to read them. The truth is lost in adulatory panegyrics and vituperative insolence." Panegyrics, probably panegyrics. What does this mean? A public speech or published text in praise of someone or something. Learn something new every day. Hold on just a second. I just had a text message that I need to respond to really quick. Please. Bear with me just a sec here, guys. Little personal business. Okay. Sanji, vituperative, anyone? Vituperative means bitter and abusive. Strangely, Adams and Jefferson, lifelong political adversaries, both have the same problem as Volodko with the narrative of their own times. Everything is propaganda. They have their choice between propaganda lines, but truth is nowhere on the menu. Then, though, they both agree that a history by an Italian writer, Carlo Botta, is pretty good. Try reading it. You may find you've stumbled on an unknown world. Botta uses the style of Thucydides. He invents speeches representing the positions of both sides, the actual speeches being lost. He is not as good as Thucydides, maybe, but Thucydides is pretty damn good. Botta is a moderate Napoleonic liberal. Adams and Jefferson are both liberals, too. None of them is actually a Tory. If you want a Tory view of the American Revolution, neighbor, do I have two books for you. Sidney Fisher's True History of the American Revolution from 1903, and Peter Oliver's Origin and Progress of the American Rebellion in 1781. While their perspective does differ, you will find that they still resonate with Botta. Reading both sides of the war in this way, you will realize that your previous opinion on the American Revolution is an opinion about a legend that never happened. What did happen is interesting too. I usually summarize it as the Vietnam War in the 18th century. It has nothing to do with the lessons we are taught to draw from the legend. In so plainly a worldly, wise, and mature man, where does this attraction to children's stories and historical myths come from? Embarrassingly, Volodko tries to pin it on Carlyle himself, quoting Volodko. For me, one of the best criticisms of Carlyle comes from a phrase he coined himself, namely the everlasting no, which was his name for disbelief in God to oversimplify the matter. But it is more than his. The everlasting no is a rejection of the sublime in life, a rejection of the sacred in humanity. It is what would allow someone to think we should perhaps retry slavery or dictatorship, or even worse, it is taking pleasure in mocking and jeering at things of the highest value, such as freedom from chains, as if they are only valued by insipid fools who know no better. Close quote. No, Volodko, you insufferable midwit. By the everlasting no, Carlyle meant the common refusal to accept the climate of universal mendacity and its resultant eternal bureaucratic stasis. A no which prevented his complacent Victorian England from embracing the proactive radical political change he knew was necessary, or which I think I know is necessary. And his alternative is nothing, the status quo. And his alternative is not even nothing, but what Carlyle called shams. Lies like the historically ridiculous idea that the American Revolution had something to do with freedom from chains. One practically expects him to break out into a Dr. King speech, or even say something about George Floyd. The virus is still at work. No, here is a better quote from Here is a better Carlyle quote on shams from his great essay on the revolutions of 1848. Quote from Carlyle. It's not it's not a legit mold bug piece until you get a quote from Carlyle. Welcome, made by Jim Bob Raiders. Appreciate you guys. Thank you for showing up. I am trying to make it through this live reading before my voice gives out. We've got 88 watching on YouTube right now, 45 likes. Please do me a favor and hit that like button for me. Reward my slogging through all of this on your guys' behalf. Quoting from Carlyle. What can be more miserable than this universal hunting out of the high dignitaries, solemn functionaries, and potent, grave, and reverend signors of the world? This stormful rising up of the inarticulate dumb masses everywhere, against those who pretended to be speaking for them and guiding them. These guides, then, were mere blind men only pretending to see? These rulers were not ruling at all. They had merely got on the attributes and clothes of rulers and were surreptitiously drawing the wages while the work remained undone. The kings were sham kings, play-acting as at Drury Lane. And what were the people withal that took them for real? It is probably the hugest disclosure of falsity in human things that was ever at one time made. These reverend dignitaries that sat amid their far-shining symbols in long-sounding, long-admitted professions were mere impostors then? Not a true thing they were doing, but a false thing. The story they told men was a cunningly devised fable. The gospels they preached to them were not an account of man's real position in this world, but an incoherent fabrication of dead ghosts and unborn shadows, of traditions, cants, indolences, cowardices, a falsity of falsities, which at last ceases to stick together. Who that had for this divine universe an eye which was human at all could wish that shams of any kind, especially that sham kings, should continue? No, at all costs it is to be prayed by all men that shams may cease. Good heavens, to what depths have we got when this to many a man seems strange? Yet strange to many a man it does seem, and to many a solid Englishman wholesomely digesting his pudding among what are called the cultivated classes, it seems strange exceedingly. A mad, ignorant notion, quite heterodox and big with mere ruin. He has been used to decent forms long since fallen empty of meaning, to plausible modes, solemnities grown ceremonial, what you in your iconoclast humor call shams, all his life long. Never heard that there was any harm in them, that there was any getting on without them. Did not cotton spin itself, beef grow, and groceries and spiceries come in from the east and the west, quite comfortably by the side of shams? Kings reigned what they were pleased to call reigning. Lawyers pleaded, bishops preached, and honorable members perorated. And to crown the whole, as if it were all real and no sham there, did not script continue saleable, and the banker pay in bullion or paper with a metallic basis? The greatest sham, I have always thought, is he that would destroy shams. Close quote. The greatest sham, Volochko and his ilk think, is he that would destroy shams. Does not cotton spin itself and beef grow? Who cares if our cherished founding stories are just myths, and the political lessons we take from them no more than fantasies? Does not cotton spin itself and beef grow? Do not voters vote what they are pleased to call voting? As for the metallic basis, well, in Carlyle's time, it was the old monarchs of Europe, still clinging on in 1848, who were the sham. The reality was the rising, boiling force of street democracy. In our time, the worm has turned. It is democracy that is the sham, covering for oligarchy. Anyone who cannot denounce this lie and fully accepts the consequences of the truth that lies behind it, that Americans can only escape from their increasingly awful regime by using democracy to elect a monarch who can destroy the oligarchy, becomes complicit in the lie, however astute his other analysis may be. And that was a conversation about monarchy by Curtis Yarvin. What is up, Nub Club? It is good to see you guys. Thank you for stopping by. Sanji says, this essay is better than I thought earlier. What makes you say that, Sanji? Was it just the Carlyle quote? Carlyle quote makes everything better. Just reading it. Half the time I don't even understand what he's saying. I have to read it like 5 times to actually get it. But I just appreciate the prose. I just like reading it for the experience of it. Kate J says, I was going to ask if this would be considered boomer friendly to share with your parents, but that last bareback president kind of answered that for me. Yeah. It's not exactly boomer friendly. But like I said, I think the people that he's writing to are his class fellows. He's writing to the so-called dark elves class, and they're listening. He's definitely having an impact. And I think this is something that Cooper and I were discussing about this, is that his tone has changed very much. He's beginning to talk about this stuff with more urgency and more pointedness. And I happen to know for a fact that he doesn't see the political will existing to do anything even approaching this. And so then it kind of puts you in an interesting situation where it's like, is it better to do nothing or to do everything? Because you don't want to wind up in the interim. You don't want to wind up in the in-between space. Because that's where, if you don't accomplish it all in one fell swoop, you just raise the stakes for how much more you're going to have to do to actually accomplish it next time. And honestly, the way that I'm anticipating this is that he's laying out exactly what would need to be done. And exactly what would need to be done is not what's actually going to happen. Half measures are going to be pursued. Those half measures are going to make things worse. But at the same time, they're also going to lay the groundwork for the continuation of it. This is why I'm saying I don't expect this to be something that's resolved in an election cycle or even a couple of election cycles. I also don't think that there's going to be a collapse. I think it's going to be far less dramatic than people are anticipating. We've been going through kind of just a slow grind that seems to be accelerating, but I think we're going to continue getting this sense of things accelerating while things continue slowly grinding forward. And I think we're in for probably close to a single human lifespan's worth of time still continuing along this trajectory. I expect that if not in this election cycle, in the following one, I think there's going to be some sort of a rebound. We're going to get a bit of a maybe like a 1990s style, like 80s into 90s style, sort of a revival of energy with optimism and the Jason from Two Bit Podcast is Neotrads. I think they get their time in the sun essentially, and the real. I think if there's going to be mass bloodshed, which I think we may. I think that's a mostly an anomaly of the 20th century. I'm very much along the lines of Thomas 777 here. We're trying to project the events of the 20th century and read them into what we're going into. I think is I don't think that that's right. I think we're much more 18th century in terms of the sorts of events that are happening. So even in the 18th century, obviously there was definitely plenty of bloodshed, but I think the scale obviously is drastically different. I think there's a good degree to which our politics has been exported into the digital space. The vast majority of political violence happens online now. And I think this is going to continue to happen even as actual warfare itself moves more and more to autonomous through like drones and robots and satellite warfare. That's the warfare of the new age. I think we've been in the Third World War for a long time now. We've been on a permanent economic war footing since World War II. And it's been just basically kind of reeling from one crisis to the next. So everyone who's waiting for some big shoe to drop, I don't think that that's going to happen. I don't think we're going to get some big shoe to drop. We are living in the crisis. This is the crisis. The crisis is going to take different shapes and different forms, but in every crisis doesn't happen to everyone who's living through the crisis. For some people, the crisis is an opportunity. For some people, the crisis is the thing that catapults them into prosperity beyond the crisis. So there's not going to be some kind of big epic collapse, and there's also not going to be some type of big epic restoration either. There's going to be moves that are made, and some moves are going to have bigger effects, and some moves are going to have smaller effects. But yeah, I think time is of the essence if you want to start building and you want to ensure that the continuing roiling crisis affects you as little as possible. Then it's going to start with um, developing networks of like-minded people and investing in them together. John says, if this is the crisis, then there's even more imperative to start getting shit done. Yeah, exactly. Like the time is now. It's not like, brace and wait for something to come. If you're waiting for something like that, it's not going to ever come. You're just going to be sitting there bracing and then gradually wasting away. And it's your children who are going to pay the cost of it. That's really what it comes down to. Either your bloodline dies with you, or your children get to experience a much worse, more painful, more prolonged crisis. Which do you want? Do you want your bloodline to die? No, then you need to have kids. And then do you want your kids to have a worse life than you? Because they will if you don't prepare them for it. You have to work in this life to prepare your children to have a better life. So your life is probably not going to get appreciably worse. You're going to continue with your life about it how it is, but your children are going to be much worse off. And this is how generational curses end up working. Eventually, that generational curse has to be reversed. There's a nice little rhyme there. But in order to reverse that generational curse, you have to take the responsibility on yourself. You have to take responsibility for being where you're at. It's not the Jews' fault. It's not the state's fault. It's not the Satanists' fault. It's not the Illuminati's fault. It's your fault. And the same thing goes on a social level. This is Americans' fault that Americans are where we are. And if we want to be somewhere else, it's up to us to make that happen. Someone like Yarvin coming through and laying this out, that there's utility to this and understanding and really grasping the magnitude of what's happening right now and beginning to directionally orient ourselves toward like something like this happening. There has to be popular support for something like this. And we can do our little part to cultivate that. We're seeing now this little circle of niche, arcane, weird, right-wing political podcasts are now beginning to hear our talking points reflected in the popular culture. There is some degree to which the popular culture and the political climate is downstream from the things we're talking about. Whether that's directly downstream because people are actually listening to the people who are talking about these ideas, like Oren and Academic Agent and the Prudentialist and some of these guys, Pete Quinones, whether or not they're actually directly listening to them or just imbibing the political culture through osmosis, essentially. But we can actually influence things if we want to. We just have to be intentional about it and believe that it's possible. Taylor Brown says, time to do as Thomas 777 says, begin to live historically. Yes, absolutely. I love that phrase. I've been listening to his series on World War I that he did with Pete the end of last year. And I just cannot express how much I absolutely adore the man. Anybody who doesn't like Thomas 777, I don't like you. You're not my friend. He is an absolute treasure. It's basically like sitting and getting a really fascinating, tailored directly to me, university level education on whatever subject he happens to be talking about. And I've noticed the way he talks is like, he's like a really good writer who is speaking directly the words from his writing. I really appreciate his vibe. Part of the reason I'm listening to that is because I'm beginning to refashion my understanding of the role of British intelligence with respect to the American founding and then the War of Northern Aggression. Did you guys know, we were talking about this in the King Pill Discord server the other day, which you can join now. If you go to kingpill.com, it should work. It should direct you to the right place where you can sign up for the King Pill Discord server. We'd love to have you in there. We were talking about this the other day, and what was I going to say? Did you guys know that the Russian Tsar, I think it was Tsar Alexander III, sent Russian military vessels to New York City and San Francisco at the height, I think it was in 1863, at like the height of the war, in support of the North against the South. It was very interesting because the background to this was that the Britain wanted they supported the South in the war effort because of their economic relationship to the South was the economic relationship they wanted to have with all of America, and they had a strong incentive in ensuring that their colonies remained separate colonies and did not unite into a single sovereign power that could assert itself on the globe. They wanted to be able to maintain the relationship where Britain handled all of the industrialization and manufacturing and everything, and America, as a proper client state, sent their raw materials and maintained this trade imbalance. So Britain was intervening on behalf of the South, along with France, which implicates then the different Russian or different European conflicts that had persisted for centuries up to that point. So the UK and Russia have been at odds, or specifically Britain. I know there's all these different distinctions, and I'm a retarded American who doesn't understand all of them. But the city of London, let's say, and Moscow or St. Petersburg have had many different conflicts over the years. They're mortal enemies, and so Russia had an interest in supporting the North because supporting the North undermined Britain. So they brought these ships over and plopped them right outside the U.S., basically daring Britain to actually directly intervene on behalf of the South. Because the plan had been that Britain was going to basically force a détente between the North and the South that would establish them as two separate countries, and create a peace deal. And now you're two separate countries. We can divide and conquer, sort of. And the North was the economically was the one that was beginning to industrialize and building up a manufacturing and base and stuff, which is what would actually allow them to exist as a sovereign power with legitimate imperial designs. So that whole fact of Russia intervening on behalf of I've never heard about that. I spent a couple hours just digging through old news articles and stuff, reading about the things that went into it. Because at the same time, Russia was dealing with a revolt in like what is now Poland, and it might have been Poland at the time. I don't remember exactly. I'm not great on my European history to that level of nuance. So the European powers were supporting this uprising by Poland against Russia because it's undermining the enemy. It's just all this different statecraft and stuff. There's so much statecraft history building up through the 17 and 1800s and into the 1900s that not fully understanding all of that background means you can't actually understand the events of the 1900s. And if you don't understand them, then you can't understand the events of today. All these things all string together, and you can run these lines all the way back and see these old conflicts constantly going back and forth and back and forth. So in a lot of ways, the way that Russia is being treated today is the way that Germany was being treated throughout the teens and 20s and 30s. Basically not being treated as a serious country, not actually being treated as a serious sovereign country who could exist as an empire, kind of being just given like third-rate status and not even being taken seriously, being just completely rudely disrespected in proper diplomatic channels and everything. It's just interesting seeing these cycles that go over and over and over again. All right, well, I think that's about all I got, Emmy, for today. Made it almost 2 hours, a lot longer than I expected I did. Thank you, guys. Thank you for showing up. Oh, I think there were some super chats in here I should read here. Ryan Isaac, $5 US. He says, for your family's AIDS recovery. Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it. And Slosher, $5 Canadian, says, less Mad Max and more Idiocracy. Yeah. Mad Max is just, there's going to be no Mad Max. It's don't be betting on Mad Max. There's going to be Idiocracy. More Idiocracy until it's not. Ahu Moon says the UK government was hardly unanimous on the Civil War. A huge number of elites in the UK were liberals sympathetic to abolition. Right. A lot of the sympathy for abolition was the same in the UK as it was in the US, in that, yeah, we want abolition for economic reasons because of the way it's going to compromise the economic base of the South. So yeah, there was definitely a split. But that is functionally how the UK government was proceeding. Regardless of what the internal politics were, that was how the UK government was proceeding. Part of why Britain was thinking about helping the South was that the US had been sponsoring liberal uprisings here in Canada for decades prior to the Civil War. Yeah, there's one thing. Richard Poe was one of the guys. He talked with Tom Luongo. He was talking about some of this stuff, and then I went digging elsewhere. The way he framed it, which I think is an interesting perspective on it, is that there were essentially three quote unquote civil wars in the North American region, which was what we call the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, and then the War of Southern Independence, or the War of Northern Aggression, or the War between the states, or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, all of these were, we tell, as Yarvin was talking about, we tell ourselves these myths about these noble lies, these political formulas that we use to frame all these conversations in terms of American national sovereignty. But all of these wars, it turns out, really have been proxy wars for goings on in Europe. And even obviously the Great War and then World War II, all of these wars have been wars that America has involved itself in, or has been involved in as a part of European conflicts that are happening. Which is what's very interesting about this rising, developing multipolar order, is it seems that there are major influences within the U.S. establishment that want to fully extract America from being beholden to these European influences, which would establish America really as an independent nation for the first time. I'm becoming sympathetic to this idea that we've actually we're at the beginning of the birth of the American empire. We're not at the end. America hasn't even actually officially attained imperial status yet. America has been a proxy arm for the dying British Empire. We've been the muscle, essentially, for the dying embers of the British Empire, and we're actually beginning to rise into imperial status. I suspect that if you were to tell the story of this era from 1,000 years hence, that you would say the American empire began forming at World War II. After World War II is when the American empire was in its larval stage. And it's actually, I think over the next 50 to 100 years is when you're going to see the American empire really come into its full independent self. Taylor Brown says, haha, you fools, this isn't even my final form. All right, guys, I'm out of here. Thanks for showing up. Appreciate you. Once again, kingpill.com if you want to join the King Pill Discord server. I'll be hanging out in there in a little while here, and I've got a bunch of other writing that I need to do. So keep an eye on it. Keep an eye out for that. I'm going to post some stuff on the King Pill Substack, kingpill.substack.com. You can go subscribe there as well. Appreciate all you guys. Have yourself a good one, and